Shocking allegations about the role of police provocateurs were made yesterday by Alex Jones in a debate hosted by Zero Hedge over the events surrounding the January 6th riot in Washington, D.C.
It's because the records show the opposite of what they said. Trump and all of us had a stage rented by the Supreme Court. He was supposed to have another rally there. We showed up. Before Trump ever finished his speech, people were getting tear gas and hit by bullets. And there were a bunch of provocateurs leading an attack against the police, and they broke through. And then this million-plus people then got blamed as insurrectionists, and Biden gave a big speech yesterday saying they're all terrorists. So by that extension, Kamala Harris, as the VP candidate, was bailing people out of jail that burned down police stations and firebombed federal buildings. And the idea of Biden's speech yesterday, making his whole campaign about January 6th, saying political violence is never good, the Democrats are the ones that call for political violence. So I was there with a bullhorn. I could only reach 100 yards out when the tear gas was hitting me, saying, don't go in, don't fight the police. This is a setup. And then we have hundreds of videos. And so regardless of what the left tries to do, they're all out there of people taking off their Antifa stuff and putting on the Trump garb and the police fake arresting people, attacking them and then high-fiving them. I mean, this has all come out in the new footage, and it's all getting...
Wait, fake arresting them? How were they fake
They would grab them and arrest them and then drag them in and then high-five them, take the handcuffs off and high-five them. Those videos, what people are going to take everything I say, they're going to put it on X and show what I said. That's where we dominate.
Yeah,
and so what I'm getting at here, let me tell you this. What I'm getting at here is they now admit hundreds of federal officers were there. So when Trump started his speech, this whole thing began with Ray Epps saying, go into the Capitol. He told the Jan 6 committee, yeah, it's true, it's in his text messages. He told family, I orchestrated it. So under pressure, they finally indicted him, but only recommended 6 months. So a few hundred people got manipulated into fighting the police. They were led and driven by provocateurs and other groups. They were others, then they opened the doors and the police wave them in hundreds of videos. They walk between the velvet ropes and then they indict over 1,000 people that just walked through velvet ropes. And then now we're told in the National Security Directive of President Biden, the #1 threat is the American people. And he had a declaration of war yesterday against all Trump supporters and says to protect democracy, we're not going to let you vote for Trump. So as Stalin said, I care not who casts the votes, I care who counts them. Well, Biden doesn't care who casts the votes, he cares who's allowed on the ballot. So we've already won, no one's buying this. And when this happened 3 years ago, the Wall Street Journal had to print a retraction, but they said I was there as a coward telling people to attack. Well, no, they wouldn't let me put the video on Twitter where I was saying don't go in. But the truth is it's coming out. And so that's the bottom line here.
Jones also railed against the corrupt Democratic establishment and Joe Biden for his Stalinist tactics in trying to remove Donald Trump from the ballot. Now, I'm no political scientist, but if you have a two-party system and you take one of the parties off the ballot, my math says that leaves you with a one-party system, and that's not usually a great thing. But hey, it's basically a one-party system anyway, since there isn't a ton of difference between the big government Democrats and the big government Republicans. Glenn Greenwald also attacked the media's blatant lies and distortions surrounding the January 6th events.
It was a political protest that spilled over into a riot where a small minority of the people engaged in violence. I don't think we want to urge that to happen. We don't want to defend that. I consider that lamentable. But the fact that it's laughable to call this an insurrection is actually demonstrated by the examples that they're using. This was a 3-hour riot that was extremely easily subdued. It doesn't remotely compare to any prior insurrections, let alone to the Civil War. The only people who were killed on January 6th were 4 people, all 4 of whom were Trump supporters, 2 of whom dropped dead of a heart attack and 1 from a speed overdose, because these were not exactly a well-trained militia. And when Jack Smith went to charge Donald Trump with multiple crimes, he had a lot of options to charge him with, and he charged him with a lot of crimes, including very dubious ones. He did not charge him with inciting an insurrection for reasons that I think we ought to ask ourselves why. But the fact that this is such a minor event in history is demonstrated by the fact that the media, who needed this to be a major event, immediately started lying about what happened, saying that Brian Sicknick was murdered when he had his head bashed in through a fire with a fire extinguisher, only to learn that actually he called his mother that night. He was fine. He died the next day of what the coroner said were natural causes. because the media knew that if you can't say that even one person supposedly perpetrating the insurrection killed anybody, pulled out a gun, let alone discharged a weapon, all of which is true, it's a joke to call this an insurrection. At best, it's a riot. And that's the reason why Trump hasn't been charged with an insurrection. The only time he ever commented on January 6th about whether he thought there should be violence or not was when he said the following. He said, I know that everyone here will soon be marching over to the Capitol building to peacefully and patriotically make your voices heard. He urged them to be peaceful in how they went there. To the extent there was violence, I think you can make the argument that the FBI informants that even the New York Times admits were there were the ones that urged it. But even if the people who were there were the ones responsible, at best this is a riot. You could so easily make the case that the 2020 riots were a far greater insurrectionary threat.
Meanwhile, Joe Biden kicked off his election campaign with a speech in Valley Forge where he railed against the actions of Trump supporters on January 6th in what he dubbed an insurrection.
We saw with our own eyes the violent mob storm the United States Capitol. It was almost in disbelief as you first turned on the television. For the first time in our history, insurrectionists had come to stop the peaceful transfer of power in America. First time. Smashing windows, shattering doors, attacking the police. Outside, gallows were erected as the MAGA crowd chanted, "Hang Mike Pence." Inside, they hunted for Speaker Pelosi. The House was chanting as they marched through and smashed windows, "Where's Nancy?" Over 140 police officers were injured. Jill and I attended the funeral of police officers who died as a result of the events of that day. Because of Donald Trump's lies, they died because these lies brought a mob to Washington.
People have criticized the Biden administration for engaging in a political witch hunt over the January 6th events and handing out sentences which are grossly disproportionate to the alleged crimes committed. Meanwhile, when Black Lives Matters and communist terrorists were burning American cities to the ground, they did nothing. The contrast between the inaction following widespread BLM riots, where the violence is directed at ordinary citizens and their property, versus the hyper-vigilant prosecution of the January 6th riots, demonstrates a cardinal rule. The state will not brook even the slightest hint of a challenge to its rule.